There's a guy who's a dude who does everything you would insist that a guy shouldn't do. There's nobody that he wouldn't throw in a room full of lice and infect with the flu. Though he's for human rights, he routinely recites every ethnic and national slur. He's the guy I berate, cause it's true that I hate Eddie Ashburner. He's a guy who, if you asked him for the time, he'd shove a cobra down your windpipe and then blow up your town. He'd never miss an opportunity to undo the immunity of vaccinated tribes and place a leopard in your wedding gown. He's a guy who would spy from a base on the moon before kicking his friend in the shin. And it gets even worse when he tries to immerse your new prize-winning cat in a pool full of gin. And he thinks that he's great, so you see why I hate this guy now, why you'll never infer, why I can't underrate, why I come to a state, why these feelings of loathing won't ever abate, why it's time to relate that it's true that I hate Eddie Ashburner.
As it happens, the last instant message I sent Addie was John Smith, I'm John Smith. It was completely unrelated to the message it followed, which meant, of course, that it was a reference.
I'm John Smith.
But more significantly, and to Addie, I believe, more apparently, it was a reference to the sheer averageness of that name, and to an assignment he once did during our shared classroom years in his grades 4 through 7. The trick to school, as Addie repeatedly demonstrated, was to satisfy an assignment's minimum requirements while simultaneously using it to do whatever you actually wanted. In this case, he'd managed to contrive a method to contribute to his grade for the day by writing a short story about 2 aliens who had visited the Earth for the purpose of bestowing the honor upon one person for being the planet's most average human. Of course, receiving this award immediately rendered him ineligible for it, and being rendered ineligible immediately requalified him. The story ended with the aliens back in their homeland, desperately searching their literature for the definition of a paradox. In the field at recess, Addie was a person with whom I would often discuss the nature of reality, whether there really could be parallel universes or time travel, or additional spatial dimensions, how all of that would work and what it would imply.
Imagine a world in which there are 2 dimensions, and imagine that everyone in that world is also made up of 2 dimensions. What would it look like if I, a 3-dimensional creature, would stick my hand through their world?
You know, there's plenty of red tape on actions to keep us safe. I think metaphorically there's also a fair amount of red tape on what people should think, even in their own private corners. This happens naturally in society, in communities large and small, and religions would seemingly be built on sand without it.
We're gonna experience all the world's religions from these pamphlets.
Because of this, it almost seems a standard facet of the human experience to consider one's mind to be a generally freely explorable space, with some foreboding borders surrounding it, places you would never go because you would ever need to. What if you find utter depravity back there? What if it's desperation and despair? What if you never come back? People generally purport to be interested in daring thoughtfulness and whimsicality until someone hints at breaching one of those borders within them, and some fundamental choice they made along the path is revealed. Addie never made that choice. His way was to brandish logic itself like a floodlight, say, come on, and tromp right in.
Lights on, guys. They're already on. Yeah, no, I meant I just sort of turn them on.
Thus equipped, those potentially ominous regions became comfortably lit and easily navigable, and much more of an adventure to be invited on than most. Anything discovered there that defied explanation took the form of a new frontier, a whole new challenge in explanation. And anything that couldn't be explained initially seemed so twistedly, uncannily hilarious that it was worth the trouble to find anyway. To others, what seems dark and something to be edged away from seemed to Addie to be intellectually nourishing, and the dauntless exploration of it seemed to him to be a primary feature of his very sentience.
My next film, it's going to be a metafictive epic.
So growing up with him, there was no end to thinking about thinking and then thinking about that. Addie's natural, idle disposition was itself a talent, one which is now clearer to me is rare. Internal ground rules like that transcend places and times and cultures. Addie quickly became one of the few people I called simply a friend. It's a word I don't use casually, and I've never fully defined. though I needn't define it if I'm the only one using it. But one thing it turned out to imply is that everyone in this group I've always felt should have known each other and grown up together even if they didn't.
Revisit the memories that we've all had growing up with Addie?
But we didn't grow up with him, you did.
Oh, come on, Lars. Recess!
Steve, I didn't even meet you till college.
Work just fired me.
So it didn't seem serendipitous when many of them ended up chatting with Addie or seeking him as part of their creative team, or remotely conspiring at his direction to learn and act out the scene in which Data deals only threes during an actual poker game I was playing. At school, we made up interactive games, both improvisatory and programmed.
Hey Chris, do you remember when you and Addie and I all walked around at recess and made up RPGs and things?
Steve, I think you voluntarily altered your own memories.
And we were similarly touched by the early stories and music of games like Final Fantasy Adventure for Game Boy. His favorite material often lay outside the mainstream, and I'd sometimes visit to learn that we were going to play a particular video game. He was the one to recommend lesser-known games like Robot City, The Seventh Guest, Star Trek Borg, Dear Esther, The Stanley Parable, and Virginia, immersive and narrative-driven titles where the challenge of working out what had happened often began after the game ended. He was, of course, a kindred early reader of and equal in class thinker with Douglas Adams. And speaking of Star Trek The Next Generation, he was the first person to finally get me to sit down and watch it, before later, when during a 6-month working streak on the film we had shot that visit, he sent along a VHS tape of episodes we hadn't reached yet, along with his hand-typed episode guide, so as not to spare me his comments and reactions.
I want to steal one of Guinan's hats.
Don't steal one of Guinan's hats.
No, I'm going to steal one of Guinan's hats.
His constant stream of sincere and quizzical, lovingly sardonic analyses of each character.
Does she talk or is that just a doll or something? Why are you smiling at me?
Each setting, each culture, each moral proposition, each property of physics proposed. Addie was never a mere fan of films, books, and games. He was a true experiencer of them, allowing fictional worlds the full respect of being bitten into and scrutinized even more closely and enthusiastically by their consumers than their creators. At the very first and foremost, Addie seemed to proceed on 2 basic principles I would later settle on myself, each of which I heard him declare explicitly along the way.
Actually, you know what? Let's just start talking things over until someone comes and helps us.
Essentially, try not to hurt anyone, I'm fine with whatever as long as you are, and value reason and evidence.
Did you know that you're irreducibly complex?
F*** off, be here. I'll get Steve Novella to kick your ass.
Irreducible complexity is completely flawed.
They're good because trying not to hurt others helps us clear the way for each other, to allow us to enjoy whatever we'd like, and valuing reason and evidence helps us avoid deliberately walking into brick walls while we're doing it.
Calvin, some of these people believe in homeopathy, or that I can talk to their dead relatives. What am I supposed to do?
You could tell them they're crazy.
Calvin, that won't get me a fur coat.
Once again, I would grow up to discover these were rarer than I thought. The world would later stagger me with how fuzzy it was about both of these.
Steve, you're a multi-millionaire. What? And you're going to die.
Virtually no one wants to be hurt, and there's practically never any good reason to do it, nor to discriminate between people. There's no more of a reason to presume ineptness or adeptness based on someone's skin color, sex, who they love, or how they style themselves than there is to throw yourself off a cliff onto a bed of spikes.
I am bored as hell.
No pseudo-scientific enterprise, no religion.
Very uncomfortable right now.
No meddling superstition of any kind could possibly thrive in an environment where those 2 simple ideas were accepted by its people. That's how a world full of Addies would be, unless he kept them all around as a source of humorous content. I suspect that's why Addie seemed to find humanity more amusing than anything. Those 2 ideas were so firmly grounded in him that immorality, injustice, corruption, inequality didn't just seem wrong to him, they really did seem that utterly comically ridiculous. It didn't even seem to occur to him to be angry at them. The only appropriate response in his mind seemed to be perplexed laughter. He presented his case for the obviousness of this in his films, which were often driven by characters who were intellectually sharp, but completely incapable of exercising sympathy.
So I killed her! What? I'm just joking. I only stabbed her.
Or who acted conscientiously to protect others, but failed to consider even the immediate consequences of their actions.
Emma eats so much ice cream, but, you wouldn't know it because she throws it all up.
No surprise, this emerged as his chosen career path. When Addy sat down to write a script with me, he was usually a third of a page in before I even knew what was going on.
Now this scene,
Well, that was interesting.
we filmed late at night, I remember, and this is the funniest scene I have ever filmed, ever.
We laughed so much.
And in quite a few shots, I'm actually really laughing.
She said no to what?
What the hell are you talking about?
So much that to my memory, it almost felt like laughing was a part of walking, which was difficult because you would sometimes compromise your own ability to stand.
You're bringing it back.
Given a limited amount of tape, the amount we used on outtakes due to our inability not to break character far exceeded anything I've ever heard of. Of course, breaking character wasn't always the concern, since when I wasn't voicing one of many electronic characters,
I do not have celery.
We live in a world full of chaos and sadness.
or musically garnishing material that seems so undeniably prescient that I don't think I'm being disrespectful to wonder whether he was conscientiously planning for it to be recyclable. We usually played ourselves. As Addy once correctly said, that's not acting. No individual is replaceable, but Addy was so irreplaceable that it's difficult for me to imagine a world without him. It will be instantly apparent to those who knew him well that it's everyone's loss he won't ever make another film, or write another story, or conjure his first world in virtual reality. And for me, it won't ever feel quite the same again to write, film, or program anything, knowing that Addy won't be there to show it to. Of course, his relationship with David, spanning almost 2 decades, easily topples every archaic myth ever spluttered about sexual orientation. A relationship of that quality, length, and persistence is something so many people in the world can only long for. To anyone else who knew him, please feel free to connect with me and exchange some thoughts. Relevant or irrelevant, deliberate now or idle in the future. I don't usually solicit connections, but if Addy didn't daunt you, then I don't suppose I will. He leaves us with each other, and each of us has a part of him in us. Despite the commissioned song from earlier, I don't hate him, not even now. If there's anything that does sadden and irk me, it's the knowledge that there are still some people in this world who lack the fortune to have an Addy Ashburner of their own as they grow up. We are incalculably lucky even to be alive and not immediately eaten by something. Having known Addy multiplies the odds against our luck by another significant factor. Addy offered a ludicrously simple, yet superior approach to experiencing one's momentary existence, only bolstered by the perpetual observation of the utter bizarreness of human flaw and folly that surrounded anyone who took him up on it. In what he shared with us and what he leaves behind, that offering remains on the table. For his friends, who will never shake the inspiration he so effortlessly spilled. And for strangers, who may yet decide to peek behind the neglected curtains at the rear of their minds and see the slightest glimpse of what he saw. Thank you, Addy, for providing more happiness than you could possibly have guessed.